Right now, as you're watching this video, the ground is moving. Not in one place, not in two, in at least 4 countries at once. A volcano in Italy is spitting ash into the sky. 2 volcanoes in the Philippines just erupted within days of each other. Venezuela is still shaking, more than 2 weeks after an earthquake that killed thousands. And in California, scientists just found something underground that nobody knew was there. This isn't a coincidence video. This is what's actually happening on this planet, right now, in real time. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why so many of these events are lining up at once, and what scientists are quietly starting to ask. Let's be clear about something before we go further. Earth is always moving. There are earthquakes every single day, hundreds of them, most too small to notice. Volcanoes are erupting somewhere on this planet almost constantly. That part is normal. What's not normal is the clustering. When you get major, damaging events in multiple regions within the same short window, geologists start paying closer attention, not because one causes the other necessarily, but because it tells us something about how active this period of Earth's crust really is. So in this video, we're going to walk through 4 real, ongoing situations: Venezuela, Italy, the Philippines, and California. We'll look at what's confirmed, what scientists are still trying to figure out, and where each of these stories might be headed next. Stick around, because the last one, the California discovery, is the one that has seismologists the most uneasy, and we're going to explain exactly why toward the end of this video. Let's start with the story that's been unfolding the longest and hitting the hardest: Venezuela. In late June, 2 powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela within about 40 seconds of each other. The first was strong. The second, which followed almost immediately, was even stronger, measuring in the mid-7 range on the magnitude scale. Together, they became one of the most destructive seismic events this country has experienced in over a century. The epicenter was located in a municipality west of a mid-sized city in the Yaracuy region, but the damage wasn't limited to that area. The shaking was felt strongly all the way into the capital, where a huge percentage of buildings in one particular state, right along the coast, collapsed or were severely damaged. Here's a number that puts this into perspective. Officials estimate that in the hardest-hit coastal state, roughly 80% of structures were damaged in some way. Think about that. Not 8%. 80. That's not a neighborhood losing a few buildings. That's entire communities losing the majority of the roofs over their heads in under a minute. The human cost has been staggering. Early estimates put the death toll in the hundreds, but as rescue crews continued digging through rubble in the days that followed, that number climbed. By the second week, official figures had risen into the thousands, with tens of thousands more injured. And here's the part that a lot of international coverage didn't emphasize enough. Search and rescue agencies, including the United States Geological Survey's own predictive modeling system, initially warned that the real death toll could end up significantly higher than what was being reported in real time. That's a serious statement from an agency that doesn't like to speculate. But here's where this story stops being an earthquake that happened and starts being an earthquake that is still happening. In the roughly 2 weeks following the initial quakes, monitoring agencies recorded over 1,000 aftershocks. Let that sink in for a second. That's not 1 or 2 follow-up tremors. That's more than 1,000 separate seismic events, some strong enough to be felt by residents who are already living in tents, already sleeping outside collapsed buildings, already terrified of going back indoors. Local seismic authorities reported logging more than 1,100 aftershocks within just the first 2 weeks after the main shock. That's an aftershock roughly every 15 to 20 minutes, around the clock, for 2 straight weeks. Imagine trying to rebuild your home, trying to comfort your kids, trying to sleep, while the ground keeps reminding you it's not done yet. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced. Temporary camps have been set up across the country, dozens of them, housing families who have nowhere else to go. Damaged buildings numbered in the hundreds, with a significant portion having fully collapsed. International aid has poured in from multiple countries, and even public figures with cultural ties to the region have stepped in to help, sending humanitarian shipments and using their platforms to draw attention to the crisis. Here's the question seismologists are actually asking right now. And it's not the question you'd expect. It's not, will there be another big earthquake? It's, why is the aftershock sequence lasting this long and staying this active, without meaningfully tapering off the way most sequences do after 2 weeks? Normally, aftershock frequency and intensity follow a predictable decline. Lots of activity in the first 24 to 48 hours, then a steady drop-off over the following days. When a sequence stays this active this far out, it can indicate that stress in the surrounding fault system hasn't fully released, meaning the Earth in that region is still working through the energy from the original rupture. It doesn't necessarily mean a bigger quake is coming, but it does mean this is far from over, and monitoring agencies are continuing to track it closely. So if you've been thinking, isn't the Venezuela earthquake old news by now? The answer is no. As of this video, it is still actively shaking, still displacing people, and still being watched hour by hour by scientists who don't yet have a clear answer for why the aftershocks won't quiet down. Let's talk about the human side of this for a moment, because it's easy to reduce a disaster to numbers on a screen and forget what those numbers actually represent. Nearly 87,000 families have received some form of government assistance since the earthquake struck. Think about the scale of coordination that number implies. That's not a handful of aid trucks driving around. That's a nationwide logistics operation involving tens of thousands of military and security personnel alongside more than 27,000 civilian volunteers, working day and night to distribute food, water, medical supplies, and temporary shelter materials to people who, in many cases, watch their homes fold in on themselves in under a minute. International response has been significant too. Rescue teams from multiple countries flew in during the first critical days. The window where survival odds for anyone trapped under rubble drop sharply with every passing hour. Most of those international teams have since withdrawn, which is normal procedure after the acute rescue phase ends. But it also means the ongoing recovery work now rests almost entirely on local firefighters, civil defense units, and residents helping their own neighbors dig through debris and rebuild. Financial estimates for the damage are staggering. Preliminary figures suggest losses and reconstruction costs could climb as high as $37 billion, a number that, for context, represents somewhere close to 40% of the country's entire current economic output in a single year. That's not a line item in a budget. That's a generational setback for a country that was already dealing with existing economic strain before a single building fell. Even international press coverage of the disaster has run into friction. Journalists from multiple outlets have reported facing access restrictions while trying to document the recovery effort, a detail that press freedom organizations have been tracking closely. It's a reminder that even getting accurate real-time information out of a disaster zone this large is its own kind of challenge. Now let's move across the Atlantic. Because while Venezuela has been dominating headlines, something very different but equally active has been happening in the Mediterranean. But Venezuela isn't the only place where the ground has refused to sit still. Thousands of miles away, one of the most famous volcanoes on the planet just did something it hasn't done in years, and it's still going. Let's talk about Mount Etna. Etna, on the island of Sicily, is one of the most closely monitored volcanoes on Earth, partly because it's one of the most active, and partly because millions of people live within view of it. In early July, Etna entered a new phase of explosive and effusive activity. That means two things are happening simultaneously: explosive eruptions sending ash into the sky, and effusive activity, which is lava physically flowing out of vents on the mountain. Aviation monitoring centers issued repeated volcanic ash advisories, warning that plumes from Etna were rising to altitudes of over 16,000 feet, and on at least one occasion, over 25,000 feet. To put that in perspective, commercial airliners typically cruise between 30,000 and 40,000 feet. When ash plumes start creeping into that range, it becomes a genuine aviation hazard, not just a spectacular photo opportunity. Satellite imagery, including radar data from orbiting satellites, confirmed new lava clearly emerging from a vent on the eastern side of the mountain, flowing outward in a slow but visible stream. This isn't a one-day event. Observers tracking the mountain noted that the explosive and effusive activity had been steadily increasing over a period of days, not hours, meaning this is a sustained eruption phase, not a single burst. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Etna wasn't erupting alone. Around the same window of time, on the other side of the planet, in the Philippines, not one, but multiple volcanoes were showing active eruption behavior simultaneously. Canlaon, located in the central Philippines, sent ash clouds extending northwest. Mayon, on Luzon Island, one of the most iconic and historically dangerous volcanoes in the country due to its almost perfectly symmetrical cone shape, also issued eruption alerts around the same time. And in Indonesia, not far away, Ibu volcano on Halmahera Island was reported to be in continued explosive activity as well. So, within roughly the same window, a matter of days, you had significant volcanic activity confirmed in Italy, the Philippines, and Indonesia. 3 countries, multiple active volcanic systems, all flagged by aviation and volcanic monitoring centers within the same short stretch of time. Let's zoom in on Mayon for a second because it deserves special attention. Mayon isn't just any volcano. It's often described as the most perfectly cone-shaped volcano on Earth, a near-symmetrical mountain that draws tourists and photographers from around the world. But that beautiful symmetry hides a violent history. Mayon has erupted more than 50 times in recorded history, and some of those eruptions have been deadly, including pyroclastic flows, fast-moving currents of superheated gas and volcanic matter that have wiped out entire villages in past centuries. When Mayon shows renewed activity, Philippine volcanologists don't take it lightly, because this is a mountain with a documented track record of turning from active to catastrophic with relatively little warning. Canlaon, meanwhile, sits in the central Philippines and has had its own recent history of unrest, with previous eruption phases forcing evacuations of nearby communities. And Ibu, over in Indonesia, is part of the incredibly volatile Ring of Fire, the horseshoe-shaped zone stretching around the Pacific Ocean where the majority of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur, a result of multiple tectonic plates constantly grinding against each other along this boundary. Now, does this mean these volcanoes are connected? Geologically speaking, no. Etna, the Philippine volcanoes, and Ibu sit on completely different tectonic systems, thousands of miles apart, with no direct physical link between their magma chambers. Volcanologists are quick to point out that global volcanic activity clustering like this happens periodically and isn't unusual on its own. Earth typically has somewhere between 40 and 50 volcanoes in some state of eruption at any given time. But here's what makes people pay attention. It's rare for so many of them to be this active, this visibly, at the same time. Active enough to trigger aviation warnings in 3 separate countries within the same week. It's the kind of clustering that doesn't happen every month. It happens rarely enough that when it does, scientists monitoring global volcanic activity take notice, even if they're not predicting a connected mega event. And this ties back to something we need to address directly. Are Venezuela's earthquakes and these volcanic eruptions related? The honest answer, and the one any credible geologist will give you, is that there's no confirmed direct link between a specific earthquake in northern South America and volcanic eruptions in the Mediterranean or Southeast Asia. These are different tectonic plates, different fault systems, different magma sources. What is true is this: Earth's crust is a single interconnected shell, broken into plates that are constantly shifting, grinding, and releasing stress. When you get a period of unusually high global seismic and volcanic activity, like what we're currently seeing, it doesn't mean one event caused another. It means we're in an active window for the planet as a whole. And when you string these events together, Venezuela, Etna, Canlaon, Mayon, Ibu, you start to see just how much is happening simultaneously on a planet that most people assume is quiet and stable beneath their feet. But we haven't even gotten to the story that has scientists the most concerned. And it's happening much closer to home for a lot of you watching this. Because while Venezuela and the volcanoes have been making headlines, geologists quietly announced something in California that changes how we think about earthquake risk in one of the most populated regions in North America. California sits on the San Andreas Fault System, one of the most studied, most monitored fault lines on the planet. Everyone who lives there grows up knowing about the big one, the long-predicted major earthquake that's been discussed for decades. The San Andreas itself stretches for roughly 800 miles through the state, marking the boundary where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate grind against each other, moving at a rate of roughly 2 inches per year, slow by human standards, but more than enough to build up enormous stress over decades and centuries. But in the past couple of weeks, something new happened. Researchers identified and confirmed the presence of another significant fault, one that hadn't been fully mapped or understood before, capable of producing an earthquake in the magnitude 7 range. This isn't a minor side note fault. This is a previously underappreciated structure that adds a new variable to California's earthquake preparedness planning. To put a magnitude 7 earthquake in perspective, this is roughly the same category as the 2010 Haiti earthquake, one of the deadliest seismic disasters of the past 2 decades. It's also comparable in scale to the earthquakes that struck Venezuela just weeks earlier. The same kind of event capable of collapsing buildings not designed to withstand that level of shaking. The difference is that California, unlike many earthquake-prone regions, has some of the strictest seismic building codes in the world, which significantly reduces, though never eliminates, the risk of catastrophic structural collapse. Now, to be fair to the science here, and this matters because we're not in the business of fear-mongering without facts, scientists have been very clear that they cannot say if or when an earthquake on this fault will occur. Identifying a fault doesn't mean a countdown clock has started. What it does mean is that hazard models, the maps and calculations that emergency planners use to prepare cities, hospitals, and infrastructure, need to be updated to account for this new information. And this discovery didn't happen in isolation. Around the same time, Southern California recorded a cluster of smaller earthquakes near the San Diego County area. Magnitudes in the 2 to 3.5 range, several of them within just days of each other. On their own, quakes this small are common and rarely cause damage. The U.S. Geological Survey notes that of the roughly 500,000 detectable earthquakes worldwide each year, only about 100 cause any real damage at all. Most people never even feel the vast majority of them. But when a cluster of small quakes appears in the same window that a brand new, previously unmapped fault gets confirmed nearby, seismologists start looking at the bigger picture rather than each event in isolation. Is this cluster related to the newly discovered fault? Is it just normal background seismicity in an area that's naturally active? Right now, the honest answer is, it's too early to say for certain, and researchers are actively studying the relationship. Here's the piece that ties this entire video together. Let's pull back for a second and ask a bigger question. Has anything like this happened before? Has Earth ever gone through a period where multiple major seismic and volcanic events lined up like this? The answer is yes. And looking at those past periods actually tells us something useful. Geological records show that clustering of significant earthquakes and eruptions across different regions happens periodically throughout history, and in almost every documented case. Researchers eventually concluded these were independent events that simply overlapped in time, rather than events with a shared trigger mechanism. That's actually reassuring in one sense. It means the scientific community has seen patterns like this before and has tools to study them without jumping to unfounded conclusions. But it also means each individual event still needs to be taken seriously on its own terms, evaluated with its own data, monitored with its own set of instruments. That's exactly what's happening right now. Venezuelan seismologists are studying their aftershock sequence independently. Italian volcanologists are tracking Etna's lava output independently. Philippine and Indonesian observatories are monitoring their respective volcanoes independently. And American geologists are mapping California's new fault independently. 4 separate scientific efforts, 4 separate data sets, 4 separate teams of experts. All working in parallel because that's what responsible science looks like when the world happens to get active all at once. We've just walked through 4 separate, real, currently unfolding situations. An earthquake and aftershock crisis in Venezuela that's still active more than 2 weeks later. A sustained multi-day eruption at one of the most closely watched volcanoes in Europe. Simultaneous volcanic activity across the Philippines and Indonesia, triggering international aviation warnings, and a newly confirmed earthquake fault in California, discovered during a period of local seismic clustering. None of these are connected by a single cause. There is no evidence of some grand unified mechanism linking a fault line in California to a volcano in Sicily. What connects them is timing, and what that timing reveals is something worth sitting with for a second. This planet is not a static, quiet place. It is an active, moving, constantly shifting system. And right now, in this particular window of time, multiple parts of that system are expressing that activity at once, in ways that are measurable, documented, and being tracked in real time by scientists around the world. That's not a reason to panic. Venezuela's earthquake sequence, however devastating, follows patterns that seismologists understand, even if they can't yet explain why the aftershocks are lasting this long. Etna erupting is, in some sense, Etna simply doing what Etna does. It's one of the most active volcanoes on the planet, and eruptions are part of its normal cycle, even when they're this visually dramatic. The Philippine and Indonesian volcanic activity, while serious enough to warrant international aviation alerts, is being actively monitored by well-established volcanic observatories in both countries. And the California fault discovery, while unsettling, is actually a sign that the scientific system is working exactly as it should. Researchers are finding new information and immediately factoring it into public safety planning, rather than that information staying hidden until it's too late. So let's bring this all together. Right now, as of this video, Venezuela is still recording aftershocks, over 1,000 of them in the 2 weeks following the original quake, while displaced families continue living in temporary camps and international aid continues arriving. Mount Etna in Italy is in an active eruptive phase, with lava flows confirmed by satellite imagery and ash plumes triggering aviation warnings. In the Philippines and Indonesia, multiple volcanoes, Canlaon, Mayon, and Ibu, have shown active eruption behavior within days of each other. And in California, scientists have confirmed a previously unmapped fault capable of a magnitude 7 earthquake, discovered during a period of local seismic clustering near San Diego County. 4 different countries, 4 different tectonic systems, all active, all being monitored, all unfolding at the same time. Is Earth falling apart? No. Is this proof of some hidden global event connecting everything? No. The honest scientific answer is that these are separate systems experiencing a period of overlapping activity, and that overlap is exactly what makes this moment worth understanding rather than ignoring. What we do know is this: the agencies monitoring these events, the USGS, Volcanic Ash Advisory Centers, local seismological institutes, are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're tracking, updating, and adjusting hazard models in real time as new information comes in. That's the system working, even when the news it produces is unsettling. We'll be continuing to follow all 4 of these stories as they develop, especially Venezuela's aftershock sequence, which shows no clear sign of ending yet, and the new fault discovery in California, which could reshape how that region prepares for the next major seismic event. We'll also be keeping an eye on Etna's lava output, which historically has continued flowing for weeks at a time once it enters this kind of sustained phase, and on whether Canlaon, Mayon, and Ibu settle back into dormancy or continue building towards something larger. This is exactly why staying informed on stories like these matters. Not because you need to live in fear of the ground beneath you, but because understanding how this planet actually behaves gives you a clearer, calmer picture of the world than the panic headlines you might scroll past on social media. Real data, real sources, real context. That's the difference between being informed and being scared. If this video helped you understand what's actually happening across the planet right now, not the panic version, not the exaggerated version, but the real, sourced, documented version, do us a favor and hit subscribe. We're going to keep tracking these situations as new data comes in, and you don't want to miss the updates. And if you want to understand exactly why Yellowstone has been behaving strangely too, a story we covered recently that ties into this same pattern of global seismic and volcanic activity. Go check out that video next. It might change how you think about what normal really means for this planet. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.